Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Roopa's 6 Questions for Authors. It's a pleasure to welcome today CJ Farley, my friend and a fabulous writer. CJ Farley worked as a journalist and then as a tech executive while building his career as a novelist. 6 questions later, today, you're going to see why his jobs and his multiple jobs as technologist, writer, etc., don't actually conflict. They're actually very complementary. CJ, first, tell us about your book and hold it up for us.
Yeah, well, my newest book is called Who Knows You by Heart. You can also see it behind me, Who Knows You by Heart. It's a thriller, it's a love story, it's a mystery, it's a comedy. It's a book about a young Black female coder who joins a big tech firm and gets recruited to be part of a very secretive AI project that really questions her notions about work, about life, about love. And it's a fun story, but it also grapples with a lot of the issues that we're all dealing with today about whether AI is going to benefit the few or the many, and whether or not AI should be involved in creative pursuits, and how deeply do we want to embed AI into our lives. These are some of the questions that my book deals with. It deals with humor, with satire, with some thrills thrown into. So I think people will enjoy reading Who Knows You by Heart.
Absolutely, CJ. I'm truly loving it. I'm sort of halfway through, and it's the book that's on the side of my bed. And it's sort of I'm one of those readers who reads in bites. It'll probably take me just a little longer, but I'm loving it. And what I truly love about it is how introspective you made your protagonist, because in many ways each of us wakes up in the morning, reads a bit of AI news and goes down a bit of a rabbit hole, and you kind of have her doing little asides where she's thinking these things through. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So
Thanks for reading.
yeah, of course. And let me get into the Inquisition part of our conversation
Uh,
today. It's called Rupa 6 Questions, and I do have specifically 6 questions, which come because my background, as some of you, as my audience will know, is it really been in business. I've been a strategist and innovation, executive and M&A executive during the day. In the nights I write, and now of late I've been writing fiction, murder mysteries actually. And anyone who hears that has to ask, like, how does that work? And those all of the questions that I got, I thought, hey, I'd like to ask my fellow friend authors the same 6 questions. So that's the provenance of this discussion.
I'm ready.
Okay, so the my first question, I call it the origin spark. Every writer has a first idea, the one that made them think, I have to write this. What was your origin spark, and did it ever become something that, has that original spark, did that become a book?
Well, I think it's a great question because I kind of believe in the power of origin stories. I think when you go see superhero movies, Spider-Man, he has an origin story. He was bitten by a radioactive spider, and of course, the Hulk has a origin story because he got a blast of gamma radiation. I
Right.
think those kinds of things are true in real life. Things happen to us early in our lives, or stories come to us, and they actually sort of animate all the rest of our creative endeavors. And for me, there was a book that I wanted to write back when I was in college called Around Harvard Square. I remember for some reason that title just came to me when I was in college, and the book was about the Harvard Lampoon because I was an editor of the Harvard Lampoon, the really old humor magazine at Harvard. And I always thought there's a story here in terms of the secrecy of the organization, in terms of the humor of the organization, in terms of what goes on there. You can really set an involving story there. And so I came up with that idea back in the 80s, and I didn't end up publishing it until 30 years later. And the reason it took so long is I found that after I wrote it, because college is a crazy time, lots of things are going on. I didn't feel I really had enough perspective to tell the story right, to get those insights into what it all meant. And so it took some time for that story to really sort of marinate, within me before I figured out how I wanted to approach it. And I, I quote, maybe I quote poetry too much, but Rilke has a prose poem that kind of speaks to that. He's one of my favorite poets, and it's this prose poem where he talks about you've got to see a lot of life, basically. I'm paraphrasing,
Mhm.
before you can actually start to write about it. And he has this one line that even after you've seen a lot of life, he says, "quote Not till they have turned to blood within us, to glance and gesture, nameless."
Right.
And no longer to be distinguished from ourselves. Not till then can it happen that in the most rare hour of the first word of a verse arises in their midst and goes forth from them. So you've got to take all the stuff in, let it marinate, and then maybe one great line will come out, or maybe in my case, one book. But it can take time sometimes.
Totally and true. And actually, you hear all these stories about authors who lost their first draft and then wrote it again, and usually swear that it's a better version, right? And it's a version of that. You're writing it in your head all the time.
But
So,
yeah, but I think you have to be careful of that too, because I don't belabor go too long to this one question. But those are my first book was published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and fantastic publisher. I remember another guy on that same publishing house was a guy named Harold Brodkey, really strong writer, and he famously was writing a book for over 2 decades. And
okay,
when he
yes,
finally came out with it, Party of Animals, people didn't love it. People weren't feeling it. I think part of the problem was he was writing it and seemingly rewriting it, and
right.
he began telling many stories at once until the one
Mm,
story he really had to tell. So sometimes you got to know when to pull the plug and really get the thing out there, and
right.
not just keep chewing over the same piece of gum over and over again.
That's a very wise counsel, CJ. Thank you. So, since we're kind of tipping into the second question, which is called I call it the process ritual, right? Walk me through what writing actually looks like for you on a typical day, not the romanticized version, but the real one. Not Roald Dahl putting on his writing robe, sitting for 5 hours every morning. I mean, I don't think many of us have that luxury anyway. So, what does writing actually look like, the process for you?
Well, I know that many writers have a set process they go to every day. And for me, my writing process has changed depending on sort of phase of life I'm in.
Hmm.
When I was, young and single, I wrote a certain kind of way. I could write at any time during the day. I'd sometimes duck down to when I was at USA Today, or duck down to McDonald's in the bottom of the building and go right there for during my lunch hour. When I got married and had kids, you kind of have to sneak in some writing when your kids are finally asleep, and then get some writing done that way. And my writing process will change again very soon, because I recently enrolled at Adelphi University to get my MFA. And I
Oh,
did that because I really wanted to have a chance to, one, they gave me a scholarship, and two, I wanted to have a chance to really interact with professors and other writers,
mhm.
um, so I could hone my prose even more and sort of learn from them. So I think that when you're a writer, things can change at different stages of your life. I think that keeps things fresh. It keeps your ideas fresh. It keeps the way you work fresh. And I've tried to do that throughout my life.
That's really fabulous and thoughtful, because that is the piece that you often miss when you hear, the smart writers talk about our process. It feels very, very, structured and set in time, and yeah, we need to be open to dynamism. We talk about that. Talk to me about this sort of what I call the day job tension. Question number six, which is writing and your professional life, which of course also contain writing, but they exist in the same brain because you were writing about very different things during the day, right? What has your writing for your books given your career, and the other way around? What did your day job do for your writing that is now gone into fiction as well?
Well, the great thing about being a journalist is you get to interview a lot of different people who
Mhm.
inspire you, not only with some of the facts they share, but sometimes by the reality of their lives in terms of what they're doing. I remember years ago I went to London to interview Kazuo Ishiguro, the man who wrote The Remains of the Day,
Yeah,
Nobel Prize winner. And I was inspired by meeting him because he's a guy that wasn't afraid to turn what some people might call genre fiction into art.
right,
When you think of some of his work, people sort of categorize it as science fiction. Um, he wrote another book called The Buried Giant. That was the book I interviewed him for, that some people might classify as fantasy. But in his hands, these weren't just sort of bestsellers. These just weren't, popular books, and though they were, they also had real strong artistic intent. And he's got a Nobel Prize, to show that he was on the right track. And
right.
so the way he was able to elevate what some people might sort of write off as genre fiction into something that was deep and profound and lasting, that had an impact on me talking to him about that. And also, I remember I interviewed Alex Haley once.
Hmm.
Alex Haley was both a journalist and a guy that sort of took journalism in a new way, in a way that was sort of novelistic in form. There are a lot of writers in the 70s who thought they were going to write the big book, the big great American novel that was going to change human consciousness. And
Right.
Norman Mailer was someone who thought he could do that, and Philip Roth. But what I loved about Alex Haley is he actually did it. He created a book with roots that grappled with American history and showed the kind of connections, the family connections people have to slavery
Yeah,
and to enslaving people. And
right.
it was something that people were almost afraid to talk about before he started doing it. And
Hmm.
afterwards, everybody began to research their family history, their roots. He also wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X, which is a great mixture of biography and memoir. So
Yeah.
the fact he was able to push these journalistic forums into new ways and to really excite the American public and their imagination, actually change the way people thought about history, that was very inspirational talking to them about that. And I had that opportunity through journalism.
No, that's amazing, and sort of the sort of melding both and learning from each, right? Wonderful, and what a great set of experience! And my goodness, take me along as your scribe next time. Well, so question number four. It feels like every idea you've had, you have done something productive and important with it. But has there ever been, question four, the abandoned idea? What is the book or an idea you've started with and then walked away from? And perhaps what does it say about you that you couldn't actually bring it to a finish? Is there any such idea?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, and I learned this lesson when I wrote Around Harvard Square back in the 80s and didn't publish it till 30 years later, is that just because you're abandoning an idea for now doesn't mean you might come back to it in some other way.
Yeah.
And so you shouldn't necessarily give up on things. Sometimes you just want to sort of store it away, see if through sleeping on it, through other experiences, there's another angle on it that might excite you.
Yeah.
There's no reason to push an idea that's not working, but there might be aspects of that you can use later. Um, Also, sometimes there are bits and pieces of a past book that work their way into your new book, and seem to fit the plot. And
Right.
that happened in my book, Who Knows You by Heart, where I'd been working on another book a while back that I kind of set aside. And then as I was writing this book, I realized, oh, there's a place here for a book that could be a book within a book,
Right.
that because I've actually written that book, it will seem fully formed and really give life and detail to the current book. And so
Right.
that's exactly what I did. So don't give up hope. Everything you do can be repurposed or used in some way. And so I think that you never waste your time writing a book.
It's too true. And I think your own experience is a testament to that. And some of my other writers too that I've talked to always sort of say that there was this idea that they hope to come back to later or have come back to after ages. So, or you see echoes of it elsewhere, right? So and in the same spirit of never giving up, I think there's an element of success that I think we need to examine as a writer, because I think there's being a writer and then being an author, and being an author can put you in the limelight as far as how do you measure success. question number 5 is what I call the shelf test, right? When you finish a book, you probably have an internal sense of whether and the book has succeeded. And some people think of measures of success as number of copies sold, but in today's environment, that's probably not the only metric you want to go by, right? So, what is your own metric of success?
Yeah, I think your metric has to be internal and not based on external information. I remember years ago, I sent a letter to John Updike asking him about like advice on getting published, and he actually sent a letter back, and he said something like, and I'm paraphrasing, that don't worry if your book doesn't seem to do well. Some dumb people write some very good, successful books, and some very smart people write books that don't go anywhere. And I don't know quite what he meant by that, but my takeaway is that success and failure of a book, in terms of sales and critical reception, isn't necessarily a reflection of the worth of the book or the worth of you spending the time writing the book. So I've never measured my books by that. So, with my new book, Who Knows You by Heart, I wrote it, it got great reviews, but that doesn't affect my writing process or what I'm going to do next or how I feel about the book. And it shouldn't, because you shouldn't let sort of these outsized factors affect things. And also, attitudes about books change. You think of a book like The Good Earth by Pearl Buck. And she won the Nobel Prize back in the day, but nobody reads that book. Nobody cares about the book because it's so far off in terms of its take on Asia and China. It makes no sense to the modern reader, even though it's much celebrated then. There are other books that, of course, grow in reputation, and people celebrate them later on. So, I just don't worry about it. I just keep on writing.
Yeah, I remember reading The Good Earth as a young girl and thinking, all right. That's literally how I kind of furrowed my brow. There's a scene about this woman, giving birth in the field, tying the child to the back, and like she makes it. And I said, that's not happening. That's just such an exoticized view of the world. I know it. But yes, it has to be driven internally. And I think most authors, if you don't get there, you may lose steam. It's much better if you can find that internal, angel to work with. So then comes the final question, and it's intentionally a little provocative, right? So I call it the necessary lie. I think all writers protect something of themselves and tell themselves a little bit of a white lie to keep themselves going. And for me, it has tended to be that hey, everyone wants to read mystery novels, though in reality, the type of mystery novels I write, I know there's a certain demographic for it, and but I try not to pigeonhole myself. I still try to write for everyone, for example. So do you have a lie you tell yourself?
Well, my approach to writing is you've got to make sure, and it's the same approach to journalism, that you're really trying to strip away lies. In journalism, you're always trying to be as honest as possible and not care where the chips fall. You're trying to press people to get the facts on things, and then you're trying to make sure you're representing the facts accurately before you publish it. And I feel that novelists have the same kind of connection to the truth, where whenever I'm sitting down and writing, I'm thinking, what am I afraid of? What are things that people aren't saying that they should say? What am I telling myself that's not true? And then break through that and tell the truth on the page. I think one of the most satisfying things for a reader to encounter in a book is something they were afraid to talk about or couldn't find the words to talk about, or perhaps got shut down when they tried to talk about it, and they see it on the page. It's an electric feeling where you're like, finally, someone's putting into words. Finally, someone's brave enough to say that.
Right.
Or finally, this is out there, and I was so worried that no one would ever express it. So if you can break through the lies that society tells you to tell, that maybe people around you are telling you to tell, and maybe you're telling yourself to tell, if you can break through those lies and get them into a book, that's exciting. And whether it sells or not, you've done something special.
Right. I am not surprised you answered it that way. If anyone has met CJ, you know that he is on the quest to tell it like it is. So thank you, CJ. So that's my six questions, and I truly appreciate you, CJ, taking the time and telling us about your process. I feel like if I had my druthers, we'd do this for another hour. But in today's world, this is the snippet that my viewers will get. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Great questions.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye. Oh, before I forget, I really would love it if y'all could take a second and hit follow and subscribe. Look forward to seeing y'all again.